I've always lived in an old house with my mom and my grandmother. It wasn't a big house, but there was something about it that felt off. It was as if the walls held secrets, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the house always seemed to have a strange, eerie atmosphere. The most unsettling place was my grandmother's room. Even during the day, when the sun shone through the windows, it felt like something was lurking in that room. At night, the feeling intensified. As a child, I remember passing by her room and always feeling like I was being watched. It didn't matter whether it was daytime or night, there was an invisible presence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Every time I walked past her door, I had to rush, as if something was waiting for me to look too long. It wasn't just the room, it was the door itself. Something about it just felt wrong. Even though my grandmother was a kind and sweet woman, her room had an entirely different energy. It was as though it belonged to someone or something else. I would never linger in the doorway. If I had to go near it, my heart would race, and I'd always feel an overwhelming urge to get away as quickly as possible. It wasn't just my imagination. The place felt alive with something I couldn't understand. I grew up in that house, and over the years I got used to the feeling of being watched, but there was always that lingering dread, a constant sense that something wasn't right with that room, something I couldn't explain. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was right next to my grandmother's room, so I had to pass by her door to get there. As soon as I walked past, that same feeling of being watched washed over me. It was like someone was standing there just waiting for me to notice. I froze for a moment, my heart racing, but I forced myself to keep moving, trying to shake off the anxiety. When I glanced toward the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The door to my grandmother's room was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I saw a silhouette standing in the darkness. It wasn't my grandmother, and it wasn't my mom. It was a figure, but it was hard to make out any details. All I could see was the shape of someone standing completely still in the shadows. A feeling of dread hit me like a heavy weight. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the figure in the doorway, too terrified to make a sound. It was as though the air around me had thickened, and I could barely breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I gathered enough courage to flick on the light in the hallway. The second the light illuminated the room, the figure was gone. There was no one there, just the empty room, as it always had been. My heart was pounding in my chest as I quickly went to the bathroom, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But when I returned to my room, I still couldn't shake the feeling. Something wasn't right, and the fear that had settled in my chest wouldn't go away. I lay there in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to understand what had just happened. The house felt even quieter than usual, but somehow I felt less alone than I ever had before. Even with the hallway light on, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It clung to me like a shadow, following me wherever I went. I quickly ran to the bathroom, hoping that the act of doing something would distract me from the growing unease. But when I returned to my room, the same overwhelming sensation hit me again. It was as if someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck, waiting for me to turn around. I couldn't take it any longer. My heart was racing and my thoughts were tangled in fear. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers over my head, hoping that hiding would make the feeling disappear. But no matter how tightly I wrapped myself in the blanket, the feeling remained. It felt like someone was there, standing so close that I could almost feel their presence pressing into the fabric of the covers. I held my breath, waiting for it to go away, but it didn't. Then it happened. I began to hear a soft sound, a rhythmic breathing, almost too quiet to be real. It wasn't my own breath. It was too steady, too calm, and too close. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation. I peeked from under the covers, but I couldn't see anything. The door to my room was still locked, and there was no one else in the house. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. But the breathing didn't stop. It was as if whoever was there was right next to me, inches away from my face. I could feel the cold air against my skin, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. My body felt heavy, as though it was being held down by the fear itself. The room was suffocating, and I felt trapped in the terror, unable to escape. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences escalated. It started with the doors. One by one, They would close on their own, with no wind or explanation. At night, when the house should have been quiet, I'd hear unsettling noises from the kitchen, like pots clanging or something dragging across the floor. Each sound made my skin crawl, and each night, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It wasn't just a fleeting thought anymore, it was a constant pressure on my mind, as if something or someone was lurking just out of sight. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was all in my head, that my nerves were getting the best of me. But the events didn't stop. They seemed to happen more frequently, and every time I would walk into a room, the eerie sensation would follow me. The oppressive air in the house made it feel like something was closing in around me. I couldn't shake the feeling that an evil presence had settled in, watching, waiting. What terrified me the most was that no one else seemed to notice. My mom and grandma went about their days, completely oblivious to the strange happenings that were driving me to the edge of sanity. I tried to talk to them to explain what was going on, but they dismissed it as nothing more than my imagination running wild. Their lack of concern only made the fear grow. I was alone in this, left to battle the increasing unease and to face the unknown forces that seemed to be haunting my every step. As the days wore on, I became convinced that something malevolent had taken root in the house, something I couldn't see but could feel creeping around every corner. I had no answers, no explanations, only fear. It was as if the house itself was alive and it wanted me gone. But no matter how much I wanted to escape, there was nowhere to run. As the days stretched on, my fear only intensified. I tried to make sense of everything, searching for an explanation, any explanation that could calm the storm of terror raging inside me. Was it something supernatural? Or was I slowly losing my mind? The constant feeling of being watched, the strange noises, the things moving on their own, all pointed to something beyond the ordinary. But I couldn't shake the doubt, wondering if my own fear was warping my perception of reality. I would lay awake at night, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But no matter how hard I tried to reason with myself, the terror never left. It clung to me, suffocating me with every breath I took. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Every creak and groan of the old walls only deepened my dread. In the end, I didn't know if the worst was still to come, or if I had already faced the full force of whatever haunted that house. There was no way to know for sure. What remained was the gnawing uncertainty and the lingering sense that something, or someone, was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness hadn't finished with me yet. And so I continue to live with the terror, unable to escape it, always feeling as though I am not truly alone. The house, with all its secrets, still holds me captive, and though I've learned to go through the motions of daily life, I'm haunted by the question of whether I'll ever truly be free from its grip. I used to be close friends with a couple who lived next door. They were wonderful people, the kind of neighbors anyone would wish for. We had a tradition of gathering on weekends for coffee and long conversations, and during those moments, everything seemed perfect. Their home was warm and welcoming, filled with laughter and good company, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. When they were alone, things were different. The husband often shared his worries with me, mentioning how their peaceful home turned into a place of tension when no one else was around. They would argue, and sometimes the fights became almost violent. His wife, a talented but relatively unknown singer, was passionate about her music and worked tirelessly to succeed. She was always on the cusp of something big, but every time an opportunity arose, something inexplicable happened to derail it. I didn't understand how such a loving and talented person could face so much bad luck. Her husband confided in me several times, admitting he felt like something was working against her, though he couldn't explain what it was. There was an eerie undercurrent in their home that I couldn't quite pinpoint, and as much as I tried to dismiss it as imagination, the feeling persisted. Looking back, I realized those conversations were the first signs that something darker was lurking, hidden beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life. None of us could have imagined how far it would escalate or how deeply it would change all of our lives. The peaceful atmosphere of their home began to change dramatically. The occasional arguments escalated into frequent and intense fights, and I could see the strain it was putting on both of them. She confided in me one day, her voice trembling with frustration and fear, that every time she came close to achieving something in her singing career, it felt as if an invisible force sabotaged her. It wasn't just bad luck. This was something else entirely. I started noticing subtle but unsettling changes in their home. What was once a cozy, welcoming space began to feel heavy and oppressive. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and I couldn't shake the sensation that we weren't alone whenever I visited. My friend tried to stay optimistic, pouring her energy into her music, but I could tell the weight of whatever was haunting them was wearing her down. The signs became harder to ignore. Doors creaked open or slammed shut on their own. Shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of rooms, and the once bright and cheerful home was now cast in a constant gloom. It was as if the house itself had become a vessel for something malevolent, feeding off the tension and pain within its walls. No one knew what to do or how to help. I wanted to believe it was just stress or coincidence, but deep down, I knew there was something darker at play. Whatever it was, it had taken root in their lives, and I feared it was only a matter of time before it fully revealed itself. When my friend decided to invite a medium to her home, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Something had to be done, and maybe this woman could provide answers. My friend invited me and her husband to join them for coffee on the day of the visit. I think she wanted as much support as she could get, though none of us truly understood what we were walking into. The medium arrived in the late afternoon. She was a quiet, unassuming woman, but as soon as she stepped onto the porch, her demeanor changed. She stopped, hesitating just before the doorway, her eyes fixed on something none of us could see. Her face paled, and I noticed the faintest tremble in her hands as she clutched her bag tighter. After what felt like an eternity, she stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air seemed heavier, almost oppressive, as if the house itself resented her presence. We all sat around the kitchen table, coffee cups in hand, but the atmosphere was far from casual. My friend began recounting everything that had been happening. The fights, the failures in her music career, the ominous feeling that something was actively working against her. The medium listened intently, but I could see the unease growing in her posture. She kept glancing toward the hallway leading to the rest of the house, her brow furrowed, as though she could sense something lurking just out of sight. By the time my friend finished her story, the medium looked visibly unsettled. She placed her coffee cup down, untouched, and took a deep breath. "There is something here," she said finally, her voice low but firm, "and it does not want to leave." Hearing those words sent chills down my spine. Whatever was in this house wasn't just a passing shadow or a trick of the mind. It was real, and it had no intention of letting go. The medium suggested that we pray in every room of the house to cleanse the space. I followed her instructions hesitantly, moving from room to room with my friend, her husband, and the medium. Everything felt quiet at first, too quiet. By the time we finished, we gathered in the living room to say a final prayer together. That's when things began to spiral out of control. As we held hands and prayed, my friend suddenly began to laugh, a low, chilling sound that didn't seem to belong to her. At first I thought she was nervous or trying to brush off her fear, but then her laughter grew louder and more sinister. When I looked up, her face had contorted into an expression I didn't recognize, and her voice shifted, deep and guttural, like something unnatural was speaking through her. Her husband reached out to steady her, but she shoved him hard, sending him stumbling backward. I instinctively let go of her hand, too terrified to hold on. The medium didn't flinch, though. She raised her voice, reciting a prayer I didn't recognize, her words sharp and commanding. My friend, or whatever had taken over her, turned to the medium, snarling and speaking in that monstrous voice, shouting things that made no sense but filled me with dread. Then the wind came. Out of nowhere, a powerful gust filled the room, howling like a storm trapped inside the house. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, watching as my friend thrashed and growled, her body twisting unnaturally. The medium stood firm, shouting her prayers louder, her voice rising above the chaos. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but all I could do was grip the hands of the others around me and pray that this nightmare would end. The spiritual battle grew more intense with every passing second. The medium's voice rose above the howling wind, her prayers relentless and forceful. my friend. No, whatever had taken hold of her was thrashing violently, growling and screaming in that horrifyingly deep voice. It was like witnessing a war I couldn't see but could feel in every fiber of my being. My hands trembled as I clung to the others in the circle, whispering prayers through tears, terrified to break the connection. And then it stopped. Suddenly, as if all the tension had snapped at once, my friend collapsed to the floor, her body limp and trembling. At that exact moment, the front door of the house shattered into pieces as if something unseen had been flung out with immense force. The air was heavy and still, but the oppressive darkness that had lingered throughout the night seemed to lift. My friend stirred on the floor, her voice weak and her expression dazed, as if she had just woken up from a nightmare she couldn't escape. The medium knelt beside her, speaking softly and reassuringly, but her expression was serious. When my friend regained some of her strength, the medium warned her, "What you faced tonight was powerful, deeply rooted. You must remain vigilant, pray constantly, guard yourself, and never let your faith waver. If you let it back in, it will be worse than before." My friend nodded, tears streaming down her face, clearly shaken, but willing to listen. Even after we left that night, the weight of what happened stayed with me. I couldn't shake the image of my friend's twisted face, the sound of that inhuman voice, and the force that shattered the door. The medium's words echoed in my mind, "Remain vigilant." I couldn't help but feel that what had been cast out of her hadn't truly left. It was somewhere, waiting, watching. And I realized then that some battles don't end. They just retreat into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again.